Hello and welcome to another episode of Trash to Track. In this episode, we're going to be looking at a friend of mine, Dave's Hornby Britannia from the early 1970s that he said is in a bit of a mess. So, getting out of the box, it becomes immediately apparent that this Britannia is finished in a gloss finish, something that I've never seen before. It also becomes apparent that the side rods on this side of the loco leave a lot to be desired, and that smoke deflector looks a little bit loose as well. So taking the model out of its acetate box, as I said, it becomes apparent that this side will certainly need some work doing to it, and the deflector then falls off, and one of the deflectors is totally missing. However, the paintwork and finish on this model seems to be immaculate, which is a bonus, as I really do quite like this gloss finish that this Britannia has. I can just about see through the acetate there that there seems to be some paperwork under the box, and lo and behold, we find some parts that are missing off this Britannia. There's some side rod parts, and there's also the smashed up deflector, along with the alternate numbers that this model came with when it was brand new. However, the alternate nameplates seem to have adhered themselves to this bit of paper, and it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to salvage those. This is all original paperwork from the 1970s from when this model was brand new, although unfortunately and unusually there's no date stamp on this bit of paper. Like I said, that orange stuff there is the adhesive off the alternate names, and I'm not going to be able to rectify or rescue these as it is just too far gone. So unfortunately these are just fit for the bin, as this really was horrible sticky stuff and it took ages to wash it off my fingers. Now we've had a look at the loco out the box, I'm just going to have a quick look at the tender. And this tender is fitted with the chuff chuff sound that Hornby put on some models in the 70s. As I'm not familiar with this Gloss Britannia, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at the Hornby Bible, these set of books by Pat Hammond. And the Britannia with these features, smoke unit and the chuff chuff sound, came out in 1971 and 1972. Although, interestingly, there's no mention of the gloss finish in this book, so I'm not sure if this is a rare model or not. Later research proved that this is quite a rare model, finished in this gloss finish like this. So now I'm going to put the model on the test track and give it a quick battery test, and though it proves to be a runner, its running capabilities are very weak, so I'd imagine that the X04 motor needs remagnetising, and we'll have a look at this later on. To disassemble the model, it's a simple case of removing this one screw that's underneath the smoke box door here, and then the body and chassis will separate. I'm also going to remove the smoke box door, as this holds the deflectors in place, and I'm going to have to get replacements for this, so it's worth to remove it now and then put it in the tub so we don't lose it later on. So removing that screw allows the body shell to pull away gently, but with this wired in side rods, it actually pulls the side rods out of the cylinder on that side. But as you can see, this chassis is fitted with a smoke unit and is also fitted with the typical X04 motor of the period. I'm going to have to get some wire snips to snip this fuse wire that's holding these remnants of these side rods together, and I'm going to have to strip it down and see exactly what we can reuse on this model before buying some replacement parts. So now that's all done, I'm going to start by stripping down the model, but I also find out that one of the crank pins has actually snapped off into the wheel here. So using a pair of initially the tweezer nose pliers followed by some normal pliers with serrated grip, I managed to unscrew the remnant of the crank pin out of that wheel, which is handy as it will save me replacing the wheel later on, and hopefully it's not damaged the thread too much, so we'll be able to use this wheel when we find replacement side rods. Once I'd unscrewed it a little bit, it was easy to unscrew with finger pressure, and that's the remnant of the crank pin which had snapped off in the past. So to remove the motor, you have to undo the screw at the back there, and I'm just testing the magnet with this screwdriver and there is very little magnetism left, so this is definitely going to have to be remagnetised. So I start stripping the model down now. I remove the front pony truck followed by the rear pony truck, and I keep them together with their associated screws. I'm then going to remove this long screw which removes the smoke unit. We'll have to test this later, as I'm not 100% sure this is still working. The fuses in these do tend to break and it stops them from working very well. Although that bit is turning rather nicely, so I'm hoping we can fix this. And then I'm going to remove this small brass tab which connects the wire to the pickup. The brushes of the motor fall out, and then I unscrew the motor, ready to service it. These X04 motors really are quite good for their age and for the time, and they are very much indestructible if you treat them nicely. So I'm hoping that all this is going to take is a clean up, a remagnetise, and it will be running like a new motor in no time. There is quite a bit of gunk and carbon deposit on this model, so I'm assuming that this model has got some miles on it. Just look at the dirt that I've managed to fish out there already, and I've not even really started the cleaning process yet. So using my usual method of cotton buds and a methylated spirits, I'm going to give the motor commutator there a clean up, cleaning all the brass parts, and you can see just how much carbon deposit there is in this model. Once I've cleaned the commutator faceplate with the cotton bud and meths, I'm going to give it a polish up with a fiberglass pencil to remove any of the hard to remove carbon deposits, and then using a shave down cocktail stick as usual, I'm going to clean out the brass parts to make sure that there's no build up between the brass parts on the commutator. Any build up of dirt within these can cause short circuits and very poor running, and that's the last thing you want once you've overhauled one of these models. So I just shave the end of the cocktail stick so it's in like a flat wedge shape, just to get in between the gaps there, and you'll be surprised the amount of carbon that this actually does remove. Once I've done that, I give the commutator plate another polish up with the cotton bud and meths, and then I'll turn my attention to cleaning the brushes, which are also quite dirty. As I said, I believe this model has got some mileage on it, and I am amazed that the body shell and tender are in such good condition as they are. You can see here just the reflection of that magnetic tray in the tender body shell. That's how glossy this model really is. So I'm just cleaning the brushes there, getting all the carbon buildup off them, and I also polish the brass parts with the fiberglass pencil to ensure good electric conductivity once we put them back on the motor. So I'm threading one of the brushes there onto the insulated arm, and then with finger pressure holding the spring in place and putting the opposing brush on, and then I'll give it a quick battery test. But I'm also going to lubricate the felt pads and the bearings, as all the lubrication has dried on this model, as this hasn't ran in a couple of decades. So everything will need re-lubricating. You don't need to go over the top with the oil, just enough to touch the bearings and the felt pad, just to ensure another couple of decades of good running. With the battery with its wire connector now, I'm testing the motor and it's running nicely, although it isn't very powerful. So I am going to have it remagnetised. Yeah, there's just not a lot of magnetism left in this motor at all. So I'll be taking that to Trains for You and getting them to remagnetise it for me. The bracing part here for the side rods is crumbling away, and it's also very difficult to remove. So I'm going to remove the good side rods off this side of the model and then try and prise out that plastic spacer piece. Now, looking at it, when I strip this down, it looks like the plastic spacer has been broken in the past and has been glued together and glued into the chassis, as it should be a good push friction fit. However, this took a lot of getting out, and there was some residue of glue left over on this from many years ago. So the replacement parts I needed for this were building up, so I did find some replacement parts for it, and I ended up buying a complete front of a Britannia that didn't have a motor in it. There you can see the remnants of glue on that side rod spacer there, so this has definitely been broken in the past. I'm also going to remove the chassis keeper plate here to clean up the pickups, and once this is gone, and whilst doing it the wire had come off this as the solder joint had gone dry, I'm going to give this a good cleaning up with cotton bud and methylated spirits, and then I'm going to polish those brass parts with the fiberglass pencil. Again, it just ensures good electrical conductivity. I'm going to remove the cylinder block as well, because once that's removed I'm going to give the chassis a good blasting with the WD-40 contact cleaner, just to clean out all the wheels and axles and remove all the old oil and gunk that has built up on them over time. There is a small broken piece of plastic on this cylinder block, but I'm going to reuse it as it doesn't appear to hamper the operation. Now this is the spare one I bought. This is a later model where the motor would have been in the tender, but the chassis is the same. The deflectors and the body shell are the same. So I've got all the parts I need for this Britannia, and it was cheaper to buy this whole front end than it was to buy all the individual spares. The rest of what I don't use will go into my spares bin, and I may end up using them again in the future, who knows. So once I've stripped all that down, this has had a going over with the contact cleaner, and the wheels are very free spinning now. This is the stuff I use, it's WD-40 contact cleaner, and it really is good stuff. Once it's had a spray and it's been allowed to evaporate naturally, the wheels turn very freely. And the magnet has been redone by the model shop, and as you can tell now, that magnet is very powerful. And just giving the motor a battery test, it is running a lot more powerful with a lot more torque. So this is back to the full strength that it should be. Here I am just cleaning those pickup strips there with the fiberglass pencil. I'm just resting it on the battery there so I don't bend them. And I'm also working over an old envelope so that any stray fiberglass strands don't end up on my workbench and in my fingers, as that is quite painful. I'm also polishing up the wheel backs now because again, like I said, it needs to be squeaky clean to allow good electrical conductivity on this model. And then I give them a quick wiping over with a cotton bud and methylated spirits, just to remove any residue and any leftover dirt that the fiberglass pencil missed. Now it's time to start reassembling the model, and the first thing I'm going to do is reattach this wire onto the pickups there with some fresh solder and some fresh flux. This creates a brand new join, as the old Tri-Ang join had dried out over time, which is why it allowed the solder to break in the first place. Once that's done, I just simply thread the wire through the chassis and then screw the chassis keeper plate and the pickups back into the chassis using the two brass screws we removed earlier. I say it in all the trash to tracks, and I'll say it again, do not over tighten your screws, and certainly don't use an electronic screwdriver, as you can end up de-threading and damaging the screws, or as we saw earlier, breaking the head off in the crank pin. As it's been blasted with contact cleaner, I'm going to have to re-lubricate all the axles, so I just add a small amount of oil to each of the axles so that there's some lubrication. I'm also going to apply some silicone grease there to the worm gear on the driving wheel, and then I can manipulate the wire through the there's an actual gap in the chassis just so that the motor sits back into its holder when not trapping the wire, and then I'll replace the screw to hold the back of the motor in. I'm also going to add a little bit of silicone grease to the worm gear there and just turn the motor with my finger to get it spread through the drivetrain. My friend doesn't have a layout to run it, so I'd imagine this model will go back into storage, so it needs to be well lubricated to protect the parts from any further oxidisation in the future. Once the grease has been spread, I just add a tiny amount of oil again. Now I've got the new connecting rods into the cylinders, and I'm going to reattach the cylinder block. It's a simple clip fit into the front of the chassis, and then I've got this brand new stretcher bar here out of the spares donor. And as you'll see, that is a simple push fit into the chassis, unlike the previous one which had been glued in and then the plastic had gone brittle and completely broken. I'm not sure if this smoke unit works, but I'm going to reattach it anyway. These have a habit of breaking as there's a small fuse inside which can shatter over time. But I'm going to reattach it and then give it a battery test to see if it works. Now that's the chassis rebuilt, and I'm quite happy with how this rebuild is going ahead now. I'm just going to reattach the screw there for the cylinders, as I almost forgot. And then once that's all in place, I'm going to give this a battery test just to make sure that the wheels are picking up as they should. Right, now the cylinder blocks are all in place and everything else. I've cleaned up the side rods using cotton bud and methylated spirits, as the original side rods that run the model did have quite a lot of old oil and grease on the crank pins. So these have all been cleaned up, and the first to go on is that long side rod there. Notice that the oil pot part faces towards the rear of the model, followed by a small washer, then the piston rod, which is gently put onto the slide bar and then pushed into the cylinder block, and then the other part of the valve gear is put on, and this actually fits onto a groove onto the crank pin so that you get it to the correct orientation. Then a crank pin has tiny little screw has been obtained from the donor model, and this is then screwed in place, and the same was repeated for the other side, and then the valve gear was completely rebuilt. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that when we test this with a battery, all will be good. I'm hoping that the other side rods weren't damaged due to bad quartering on the wheels, but we're about to find that out with a battery test. So just getting the battery there and resting it on, I'm pleasantly surprised to see that the side rods, when the battery stands up that is, and the motor and everything is running nicely. There was a slight whiff of smoke there that you just saw, but that's not out the smoke unit. That was actually some oil that had got onto the commutator that I then had to clean off. The smoke unit doesn't appear to be working at this point. Now the front pony wheels had a really bad coating of carbon build-up on them, so this was scraped off with a screwdriver before I cleaned the wheels properly with a cotton bud and meths, followed by polishing with the fiberglass pencil again. There's no point in cleaning all the wheels on the loco if you're not going to do the pony truck, as this would have just spread the muck to any layout that this loco decides to run on in the future. The pony truck was then given a dusting over with my old makeup brush just to remove any fluff and dirt, and this was refitted using the brass screw into the hole in the chassis plate there. There was also quite a lot of dirt build-up on the wheels in the rear pony truck, and this was removed in the same way, by scraping off the majority of it with a flat-bladed screwdriver, polishing the wheels with a cotton bud and methylated spirits, and then a polish up with my trusty fiberglass pencil again. Then this was refitted to the chassis using again the brass screw that we took off it before. Now that the chassis has been returned to its 462 configuration, we can start looking at reassembling the model, and we're coming to the end of this rebuild. I'm just going to oil the axle boxes slightly there, as there was quite a bit of dust and fluff that I removed, and they were showing signs of wear, so they did have a small amount of oil. So I'm going to turn my attention now to the body shell, and like I said earlier, this is really in quite good condition, and all it required was a dusting over with the brush to remove any dust and fluff that was stuck in there, but the paintwork and the gloss finish really is in nice condition. One thing I forgot to do earlier was just to oil up the side rods, so I'm just putting a little bit of oil on all the rivets and the crank pins and the slide bar, just so that there's no excess wear on this model. To refit the chassis to the body shell, you simply engage the two clips that are in the cab, and then the chassis just clips down on the front and can be re-secured with the screw that we took out earlier. I found this easier to do with the smoke box casting out of the way, as you could end up slipping and damaging the new deflectors. So now that's all back together, I'm going to now refit these deflectors. Again, these were cleaned, these were off the donor model, although there is just a slight amount of dirt there that I'm just going to have to scrape off. And these slide into small runs and clips, and there's also a hole in the smoke box door side there, which they all fit into. Once both deflectors are in place, I'm going to refit the smoke box door, and to do this I got the original one and give it a clean up, and then I ran a small bead of satin varnish around the inside of it, and the satin varnish will act as an adhesive and hold it in place so it doesn't fall out in the future, although it is not as strong that it can't be removed if needed. Regular viewers will know that I use satin varnish to use as an adhesive for this sort of thing. Now turning my attention to the tender, this just needed a dusting over, and then it was inverted into my loco cradle, and all the wheels were cleaned, and one of the wheels on the rear there was removed so that I could just adjust the chuff chuff sound, as it had become bent out of place over the years, and when the model was running, although you can't hear it due to the voiceover, the chuff chuff sound was quite faint. But after I'd removed the rear axle and adjusted it, it became really quite loud again, and it sounded just as it should do when it was released back in the 70s. Again, a small amount of oil on the tender axles there, as it's a metal part running in plastic, so it was starting to wear it a little bit. And then I inverted the loco in the cradle and gave the driving wheels a thorough clean and polish up with the fiberglass pencil, again followed by a cotton bud dipped in methylated spirits. And the wheels really did come up nice and shiny. Even after polishing with the fiberglass pencil, it is surprising how much dirt comes off these models. So there's Dave's Britannia, all rebuilt and ready back for service. But I also took the time to refurbish the box as well, which I gave a good clean with some baby wipes, and I repaired the cardboard bit with some rocket card glue, just so the Britannia had somewhere nice to sit. Now the smoke unit on this model had expired and didn't work, so after filming I dug around in my spares bin and I actually found a spare fuse. I disassembled the model again and fitted it, and as you can see I got the smoke unit working. But unfortunately this was after I'd filmed all the running shots, so this is all we have of the smoke unit working here. A tip I'd been given by one of my subscribers was to use baby oil instead of smoke oil, and that is exactly what you see burning here, and it works just lovely. It's nice to now know that this Britannia has been fully restored, so that the chuff chuff noise works, all the side rods have been rebuilt, and the smoke unit works. It's also got a pair of brand new deflectors, and I really hope that Dave is pleased with how his childhood toy has now been restored to fully working order. I'm going to leave you now with some shots of this Britannia running around my son's layout on a rake of coaches. If you've got an engine you'd like to see featured in a future episode of Trash to Track, please email me at the email address you can see on screen, and we'll have a look at getting it sent over, and who knows, it may feature in a Trash to Track all of its own in the future. Thanks for watching Trash to Track again. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.